I was 62 years old, sitting on a cardboard box outside the very apartment building I now own, when my former tenant, the one who used to call me that crazy old bag, walked past me without recognizing my face. The rain had been falling for 3 hours that December morning, each drop hitting my shoulders like tiny hammers of judgment. My arthritis was screaming through my swollen knuckles as I clutched the eviction notice that had my name on it. Not as the landlord. As the one being thrown out. How did I get here? My gray hair was matted against my scalp, stringy and unwashed because you can't exactly maintain a beauty routine when you're living in a 15-year-old Honda Civic. The oversized coat I'd found in a donation bin hung off my shoulders like a deflated balloon. Navy blue wool that had probably belonged to someone's deceased husband, someone who died with dignity in their own bed instead of losing everything at retirement age. The same shoulders that had carried my children when they were small, that had embraced my grandchildren at Christmas morning, that had worked double shifts for 30 years to build something, anything. But that morning, those shoulders carried nothing but shame and the weight of complete failure. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the last 6 months sleeping in my car, rotating between Walmart parking lots and 24-hour gas stations, while this building, this beautiful brick building with its red door and carefully maintained window boxes, collected rent from tenants who had no idea that their former neighbor was living out of a duffel bag and eating dollar menu hamburgers for dinner. They used to wave at me from their windows when I walked by. I remember pressing my face against the cold glass of that red door, watching Mrs. Chin from 2B hurry past with her grocery bags from the expensive market on 5th Street. She'd lived next door to me for 8 years when I had my house on Elm Street. We'd shared coffee on Sunday mornings. We'd complained about the noise from the college kids upstairs. We'd watched each other's mail when one of us went out of town, and she'd brought me soup when I had the flu 2 winters ago. She didn't see me that day. Nobody sees the homeless. We become invisible the moment we lose our address, like we're not really people anymore, just problems to step around. But what she couldn't see, what none of them could see, was the manila envelope tucked inside my coat, pressed against my ribs like a secret. The one with the bank papers that would change everything. The one that would make me their boss by next week. Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember who you really are. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. My name is Dorothy, though most people call me Dot, and I'm 65 years old now as I'm telling you this story. When I look down at my hands while I'm recording this, I see the roadmap of a life that's seen more detours than any GPS could handle. These hands have liver spots now, brown patches scattered across skin that's grown thin and soft like tissue paper. The veins stand up like little blue highways under flesh that remembers 40 years of diner shifts, diaper changes, and holding onto steering wheels during the worst storms life could throw at me. But they're steady hands. Strong hands. Hands that know how to fix a leaky faucet at 2 a.m. and balance a checkbook down to the penny. They've had to be. 3 years ago, I was living in my 15-year-old Honda Civic with a broken passenger window that I'd covered with duct tape and plastic bags from the grocery store. The car smelled like stale coffee and desperation, with that particular musty scent that comes from sleeping in the same small space night after night. Every morning I'd wake up with my neck kinked from sleeping across the front seats, my back screaming in protest, listening to the sounds of a world going to work while I tried to figure out how to make it through another day without completely falling apart. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort, though waking up to frost on the inside of your windows will humble you quickly. The worst part was the complete loss of routine, of normalcy, of the small dignities that make you feel human. Like having a place to keep your toothbrush. Like knowing where you're going to use the bathroom when you wake up. Like having an address to write on forms that ask where you live. Today, I'm sitting in the main office of Riverside Gardens Apartments, a 24-unit complex where I'm both owner and property manager. The same woman who used to beg the night security guard at Walmart to let her sleep in the parking lot now has people begging me for lease extensions, for late payment arrangements, for just one more chance. Life has a sense of humor that borders on cruel. I grew up in the 70s and 80s when women like me, working class, no college degree, divorced with kids to raise, were expected to make do with whatever scraps the world offered. We didn't have career counselors or life coaches or motivational Instagram posts telling us we could be anything we wanted. We had bills to pay and children to feed and rent that was due on the 1st of every month, no excuses. I raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment on Elm Street, working morning shifts at Mel's Diner where the coffee was always burnt and the customers always seemed to be having the worst day of their lives, and evening shifts cleaning office buildings where the fluorescent lights hummed like angry wasps and the silence was so thick you could feel it pressing against your eardrums. My youngest, Sarah, used to fall asleep at the kitchen table waiting for me to come home and help with her homework. I'd find her there at midnight, her head pillowed on her math book, pencil still clutched in her small fist like she'd been planning to keep working until I walked through the door. I'd carry her to bed, she was so light, all elbows and knees and sleepy sighs, and then sit at that same table, doing her homework by the light of the kitchen lamp so she wouldn't get in trouble the next day. I thought those were the hard years. The story really begins with my daughter Michelle and her husband Dave, though I suppose if I'm being completely honest, it begins with me being too soft-hearted for my own good. If you've ever had family members who could charm the paint off a wall while systematically picking your pocket, you'll understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Michelle inherited my dark eyes and my mother's gift for making people believe whatever she wanted them to believe. She could cry on command by the age of 5, and by 15 she'd perfected the art of making her problems sound like everyone else's emergencies. Dave, on the other hand, had mastered the more subtle skill of being just helpful enough to stay welcome but never helpful enough to actually contribute anything meaningful. Michelle is my middle child, 38 years old when this story takes place, with 2 kids and a marriage that was held together primarily by financial desperation and shared delusions about Dave's potential. She'd been struggling for years. Dave couldn't hold a job for longer than 6 months, always finding fault with managers who didn't appreciate his skills, co-workers who were jealous of his work ethic, or company policies that were designed to keep good people down. Every fired man has a story about unfair treatment. Dave had dozens. When they first approached me about moving in temporarily, to get back on their feet, I was living in my little house on Elm Street, the one I'd bought after my divorce 15 years earlier with money I'd saved working double shifts and eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more often than I care to remember. It was a modest place. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, kitchen barely big enough for a table and 4 chairs. But it was mine. The mortgage was almost paid off, and for the first time in my adult life, I'd been looking forward to having some breathing room in my budget. I should have protected that breathing room like it was oxygen. "Mom, it'll just be for 6 months, Michelle had said that Tuesday in March, sitting at my kitchen table with baby Connor on her lap and 8-year-old Emma coloring pictures at my feet. The late afternoon sun was streaming through my kitchen window, making everything look warm and possible. Dave's got this job lined up at the warehouse. It's practically guaranteed, and once we save up enough for first and last month's rent somewhere else." Emma looked up from her coloring book. She was working on a picture of a house with an impossibly green lawn and smoke curling from the chimney like a Disney movie, and said, "Can I have my own room at Grandma Dot's house? Daddy says there's an extra room just for me." How do you say no to that face? How do you explain adult failure to child hope? Dave was standing in my living room, examining my television like he was appraising it for insurance purposes, when he called out, "This is a nice setup you got here. Real nice place. We'll take good care of everything while we're here." While we're here. Like they were house-sitting instead of moving in. But I looked at Emma's hopeful face, at Michelle's tired eyes ringed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from juggling too many problems with too few solutions, at baby Connor sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, completely unaware that his family was falling apart, and I said yes. Because that's what mothers do. That's what grandmothers do. We say yes when wisdom says no, and we make room when we should make boundaries. Love makes you stupid. Family makes you broke. They moved in on a Saturday, arriving with a U-Haul truck that seemed impossibly large for a temporary stay, full of furniture that didn't fit my house and belongings that multiplied like rabbits once they crossed my threshold. Within hours, my quiet mornings became a chaos of breakfast demands, forgotten lunch money, Emma's backpack that was never where it was supposed to be, and Connor's crying that seemed to echo off every wall. Dave took over my garage immediately, claiming he needed workspace for the side business that was going to supplement his warehouse income. Buying and flipping cars, he explained, though mostly what he seemed to flip was car parts from vehicles that fell off trucks, and friends who owed him money for work that was never quite finished. My home became their headquarters for schemes I didn't want to understand. Michelle fell into a routine that seemed designed to use as much of my resources as possible while contributing as little as possible in return. She'd sleep until 10, wake up demanding coffee that I'd already made hours earlier, spend the morning watching talk shows while making elaborate meal plans that required me to buy ingredients she never quite got around to cooking, and then spend the afternoon on the phone with friends, complaining about how hard it was to find affordable housing and how expensive everything had become. Meanwhile, my grocery bill tripled and my peace of mind disappeared completely. But Emma was the bright spot in all this chaos, the reason I kept telling myself this arrangement would work. She'd curl up next to me on the couch every evening after I got home from my second job, her small body warm against my side, and tell me about her day at school in the kind of detail that only 8-year-olds can manage. She'd ask me to read to her, to help her with math homework that was getting harder every week, to braid her hair before bed because Mommy's always too tired and Daddy doesn't know how. When she hugged me goodnight, whispering, "I love you, Grandma," in my ear with a breath that smells like toothpaste and childhood, I could almost convince myself that this arrangement was working, that I was helping my family build something better. Children are weapons in the wrong hands and shields in desperate times. The months turned into a year with the inevitability of water finding its way downhill. Dave's warehouse job lasted exactly 3 weeks before he quit, claiming the supervisor had it out for him because he showed initiative and made other workers look bad. The side business in my garage generated more noise and suspicious visitors than actual income. Michelle's job searches became increasingly half-hearted, and her explanations for why various opportunities hadn't worked out became increasingly creative. The interviewer was clearly sexist. They wanted someone younger, which is age discrimination. The pay wasn't worth the commute after you factor in gas and wear on the car. The manager seemed unstable. I could tell it was a toxic work environment. Meanwhile, I was working longer hours at the diner to cover the increased expenses, picking up shifts from younger waitresses who could afford to call in sick, standing on my feet for 10 hours a day serving coffee and eggs to people who tipped in loose change and complained about everything from the temperature of their toast to the weather outside. My savings account, the one I'd been building steadily since my divorce like a life raft in case of emergency, slowly drained away like water through a broken dam. Every time I brought up timelines or expectations, Michelle would remind me how much they were helping with housework. Though I never seemed to see evidence of this help, or how Emma would be devastated if they had to move to a different school district in the middle of the year. They weren't wrong about that last part, which made everything else hurt more. The first crack in my financial foundation appeared on a Tuesday morning in September when I opened my mailbox to find a notice from First National Mortgage Company. The envelope was that particular shade of manila that screams, "Official business," and my name was typed in all capital letters like they were shouting at me through the mail. I'd been so focused on keeping up with the daily expenses, groceries that disappeared overnight, utility bills that kept climbing no matter how often I asked everyone to turn off lights, Emma's school supplies and Connor's diapers and Michelle's endless list of things the family needed, that I'd lost track of my own obligations. The letter informed me in language that was politely vicious, that I was 60 days behind on my house payment. 60 days. How had 60 days slipped by without me noticing? I stood there in my bathrobe and slippers, holding that envelope with its certified mail sticker, feeling like the ground was shifting under my feet in a way that had nothing to do with the morning coffee I hadn't had yet. 40 years of homeownership, 40 years of never missing a payment, and I was behind on my mortgage because I was too busy feeding people who weren't contributing anything but chaos to my household. This is how it starts. This is how people lose everything they've worked for. I went inside and spread my bills across the kitchen table like tarot cards predicting a very dark future. Credit cards maxed out at limits I'd never thought I'd reach. Savings account down to $237.63. I knew the exact amount because I'd been checking it obsessively, watching it shrink like ice in summer heat. Checking accounts with just enough to cover groceries for the week, if I was very careful and stuck to generic brands and discount meat. The math was simple and terrifying. I was spending twice what I earned, and the only reason I hadn't noticed sooner was because I'd been burning through savings I'd spent 15 years accumulating. Financial drowning is slow until it's fast. Michelle wandered into the kitchen around noon, still in the pajamas she'd worn for 3 days running, yawning and heading straight for the coffee pot I'd made 6 hours earlier when I was getting ready for my morning shift at the diner. "Morning, Mom," she said, pouring coffee into the mug that used to be my favorite, the one Emma had given me for Mother's Day 2 years ago with "World's Best Grandma" painted in her crooked 8-year-old handwriting. Even my coffee mug had been claimed by someone else's needs. Michelle, we need to talk, I said, gesturing to the bills spread across the table like evidence of my poor judgment. She glanced at the papers with the kind of look people give to unpleasant weather, acknowledging it but hoping it would go away if ignored, and her expression shifted from sleepy contentment to defensive irritation. Oh, Mom, don't start with the money thing again. You know we're doing everything we can. Dave's got that interview next week with the heating and cooling company, and I'm waiting to hear back from 3 different places I applied to last month. Dave had been having interviews for 18 months. Michelle had been waiting to hear back since the Obama administration. Honey, I'm behind on the mortgage, I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was racing like I'd just climbed 3 flights of stairs. I need you and Dave to start contributing to the household expenses. Real contributions, not promises. She sat down across from me, wrapping her hands around my mug in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting but felt like theft, and gave me the same look she'd given me when she was 16 and I'd asked her to clean her room. Mom, you know we would if we could. But we're saving every penny for our own place. If we start paying you rent here, how are we ever going to save enough for a deposit somewhere else? You want us to be independent, right? The logic was flawless and completely insane. You're not saving every penny, I said, thinking about the cigarettes Dave bought daily at $7 a pack, the energy drinks that filled my refrigerator at $3 each, the takeout containers I found in the trash from restaurants I couldn't afford to eat at. You're spending my pennies. That's when Dave walked in, fresh from the garage and smelling like motor oil and beer even though it wasn't even 1 p.m. yet. He'd been working on a project out there since breakfast, which usually meant drinking beer with whoever had wandered over to hang out and maybe occasionally looking at an engine that would never actually get fixed. What's all the drama about? He asked, grabbing a beer from the refrigerator. A beer I'd paid for, and glancing at the bills on the table with the casual interest you might show a neighbor's lawn problems. He said, drama, like I was being hysterical for worrying about losing my house. Mom's having a moment about money, Michelle said, rolling her eyes in a way that made me want to remind her that she was 38 years old, not 13. A moment. I stood up, feeling anger rise in my chest like heartburn. I'm 62 years old and I'm about to lose my house because I've been supporting a family of 4 on a diner waitress salary while the adults in that family treat me like a free hotel. Dave opened his beer and shrugged, like my impending homelessness was a minor inconvenience that didn't really concern him. Look, we appreciate everything you've done, but nobody asked you to support us. We're adults. We can take care of ourselves. The audacity took my breath away. Then do it, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Take care of yourselves. Somewhere else. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Michelle's mouth fell open like I'd slapped her. Dave's eyes narrowed with the calculating look of someone trying to figure out if this was a bluff he needed to call. And from the living room I could hear Emma's cartoons playing, the sound of childhood innocence, completely unaware that her world was about to explode. You don't mean that, Michelle said finally, her voice small and hurt. I do mean it, I said, though my voice was shaking now. I need you to find your own place. By the end of the month. Dave laughed, actually laughed, and took a long drink of his beer. End of the month? That's 3 weeks, Stet. You can't find a decent place in 3 weeks, not in this market. Watch me try, I thought. But Michelle started crying. Real tears, not the manipulative kind she'd perfected as a teenager to get out of trouble or chores. These were the tears of someone who just realized their safety net had holes in it. Mom, please. We don't have anywhere else to go. And what about Emma? What about Connor? You want to put your grandchildren on the street? There was the nuclear option. And it worked because of course it worked. Because I looked at this woman I'd raised, this woman who was struggling and scared and desperate enough to use her children as emotional blackmail, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't put Emma on the street. Fine, I said, sitting back down heavily. But things have to change. Dave, you need to find a job. A real job that you actually keep within 2 weeks. Michelle, you need to be bringing in income somehow, whether it's a job or benefits or selling crafts online. I don't care what it is. I'll give you until the end of the year, but come January you either contribute or you leave. I thought I was being firm. I thought I was setting boundaries. Dave nodded like this was a reasonable request, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. 4 months was enough time to figure out their next move. 4 months was enough time to drain whatever was left of my resources and then disappear, leaving me to clean up the mess. I'd just given them permission to finish me off. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in fake effort and elaborate excuses. Dave would leave every morning after breakfast, allegedly looking for work, dressed in his one clean shirt and carrying a folder of resumes that looked impressive until you realized they were all for the same resume, printed 20 times. He'd return in the afternoon with stories about how there was nothing out there for a man with his skills, how employers were discriminating against experienced workers, and how the economy was rigged against people like him. Michelle would spend hours online, presumably applying for jobs, but somehow never got called for interviews. When I asked to see what positions she was applying for, she'd get defensive and remind me that job searching was a full-time job in itself, and that I was putting too much pressure on her when she was already doing her best. They were running out the clock. Meanwhile, I was picking up extra shifts at the diner, coming home exhausted to find my house full of Dave's friends. Men who looked at my television, my microwave, my small collection of jewelry with eyes that made my skin crawl. I started keeping my tips in a coffee can hidden in my bedroom, but even that small stash kept shrinking whenever I wasn't home. Someone was going through my things. October arrived with the first frost that killed my small garden and the heating bills that started arriving like unwelcome visitors demanding payment I didn't have. I was 3 months behind on my mortgage now, and the phone calls from First National were coming daily, sometimes twice daily, with recorded messages that managed to be both polite and threatening. I stopped answering my phone. That's when Emma started having nightmares. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to the sound of her crying, and I'd find her standing in the hallway in her little pink nightgown, tears streaming down her face and her hair tangled from tossing and turning. "Grandma, she'd whisper, her voice thick with sleep and fear. "I had the bad dream again." "What bad dream, sweetheart?" "The one where we have to leave and I never see you again. The one where Mommy and Daddy take me away and you can't find us." Children absorb more stress than we realize. I'd carry her to my bed and let her sleep next to me, her small body curled against mine like a kitten seeking warmth, and I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let things get so bad. How I'd gone from being the stable adult in this family to being the one who was drowning. How do you save everyone else when you can't save yourself? The eviction notice came on a Thursday morning in November, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked like he was younger than my son Robert. I was alone in the house. Michelle had taken the kids to the park and Dave was allegedly job hunting, when the knock came at my door. 3 years of bad choices had finally caught up with me. I signed for the certified letter with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. The deputy was kind, apologetic even, but the paper he handed me was merciless. 30 days to vacate the premises. 40 years of mortgage payments, 40 years of building equity and stability, and I had 30 days to disappear. This is what failure looks like. It's typed on official letterhead with government seals. I sat at my kitchen table and read the notice 3 times before the words made sense, each reading making the reality more concrete and more devastating. Then I called First National, thinking maybe there was some mistake, maybe we could work something out, maybe there was a payment plan or a program or something. "Mrs. Collins," the woman on the phone said in a voice that had delivered this news 1,000 times before, "you're 4 months behind on your payments. We've sent multiple notices. We've tried to work with you. The foreclosure process has already begun." 4 months. 4 months of choosing groceries over mortgage payments. What if I can catch up? I asked, though I had no idea how. "You'd need to pay $14,000, plus fees and penalties, to bring the account current." $14,000. I had $87 in my checking account. I hung up the phone and put my head down on the table, right on top of that eviction notice, and I cried like I hadn't cried since my divorce. Deep, ugly sobs that came from somewhere I'd forgotten existed, the place where hope goes to die. This is what rock bottom sounds like. That's when Michelle came home with the kids. Emma ran to me immediately, her face bright with excitement about the ducks they'd seen at the park, about the playground equipment she'd climbed, about the ice cream truck that had played its tinkling song. But when she saw my face, saw the papers, saw my tears, her expression changed to something no 8-year-old should have to wear. Fear. "Grandma. What's wrong?" Michelle was reading the eviction notice over my shoulder, her face going pale as the reality of our situation finally penetrated the bubble of denial she'd been living in. "Mom? What is this?" "We have to leave," I said, my voice barely working. 30 days. I watched my daughter's world shift as she realized her safety net was gone. But instead of panic, instead of apologies, instead of promises to help fix this, Michelle's first words were, "What about us? Where are we supposed to go?" Not, "How can we help?" Not, "We'll figure this out together." Just, "What about us?" That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in my car in the driveway and made phone calls. To my oldest son Robert in California, who listened with growing silence before explaining that they couldn't help with their own teenagers still at home and Sarah's ongoing medical expenses from her accident last year. To my youngest daughter Sarah, who was more direct. "Mom, I love you, but I can barely afford my own apartment and Tom's been out of work for 2 months." My children saw me the way I'd taught them to, as the one who always had answers, not the one who needed help. I called homeless shelters and senior services, navigating automated phone systems that seemed designed to wear you down before you could actually ask for help. The waiting lists were months long. The emergency housing was full. The assistance programs had requirements I somehow made too much to qualify for but too little to actually afford. The safety net is full of holes when you actually need it. 3 weeks into my 30-day notice, Michelle and Dave announced they'd found a place across town. A 2-bedroom rental that Dave's friend was going to help them move into. They'd been looking for weeks, they said, though this was the first I'd heard of any actual apartment hunting. They'd been planning their escape while I'd been drowning. "It's perfect," Michelle said, her voice bright with false cheer and genuine relief. "Emma will stay in the same school district, and Dave's finally got that job at the auto parts store. Finally got a job. 3 days before they moved out." "What about Mom?" Emma asked from the living room where she was supposedly doing homework but obviously listening to every word with the intense focus that children bring to adult conversations they're not supposed to understand. Out of the mouths of babes. The silence that followed was deafening. Michelle and Dave exchanged a look that said everything and nothing. "Grandma Dot's going to be fine," Michelle finally said. "She's got her own plans." I had no plans. I had no options. I had 7 days and nowhere to go. Friday morning arrived like a death sentence disguised as just another day. I had exactly one appointment that mattered. The estate sale at Riverside Gardens. The eviction from my house had happened the day before, making me officially homeless for the first time in my 62 years on this earth. 24 hours of homelessness had taught me more about desperation than 6 decades of regular struggle. I'd spent the night in my car, parked in the lot behind Mel's Diner where I'd worked for 20 years, listening to trucks rumble past on the highway and trying to convince myself that this wasn't really happening. That I wasn't really a homeless senior citizen with $47 to my name and a plan so crazy it bordered on delusional. Sometimes crazy is all you have left when reasonable has failed you. At 7:30 a.m. I used the diner's bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth, nodding at the cook who was just starting his shift and pretending this was normal, that I hadn't just spent the night sleeping in my car like a teenager running away from home. I combed my gray hair as neatly as possible and straightened my best navy dress, the one with pearl buttons that I'd bought for Michelle's wedding, now wrinkled from sleeping in the car but still the most professional thing I owned. Fake it till you make it, as Emma used to say when she was practicing for school plays. By 8 a.m. I was parked outside Riverside Gardens, watching people arrive for the estate sale with the hungry efficiency of vultures circling carrion. They came with trucks and trailers, cash in their pockets and lists of items they were hoping to find. Furniture dealers and antique hunters and ordinary people looking for bargains on someone else's life. Nobody was there for the building itself. Nobody except me. The sale was already crowded when I walked in, people picking through furniture and knickknacks with the casual brutality of shoppers at a clearance sale. I watched a woman argue with her husband about whether they needed another dresser, saw a young couple loading their arms with kitchen items they probably didn't have room for, listened to the constant chatter of people discussing prices and values and whether something was worth it. I was looking at something worth much more than any of them realized. I found the estate attorney in the small office on the first floor, a tired-looking man in an expensive suit who was clearly overwhelmed by the task of liquidating an entire life's worth of possessions and properties. His desk was covered with papers and his phone was ringing constantly, and when I knocked on his door frame, he looked up with the expression of someone who was hoping for good news but expecting more problems. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into his office and closing the door behind me. "I'm interested in the property itself. The building." He looked up from his clipboard and really looked at me, taking in my gray hair, my wrinkled dress, my general appearance of someone who definitely didn't look like a real estate investor or commercial property buyer. I could see him trying to decide if I was serious or just another time waster. "Ma'am," he said carefully, setting down his pen and giving me his full attention for the first time, "this is a commercial property. 24 units, fully rented, gross income of approximately $19,000 per month. We're looking at offers in the low to mid six figures." 6 figures. I had $47 and whatever was left in my 401k. But I also had something else. Something I'd forgotten about in all the chaos of losing my house. The retirement account I'd been contributing to for 30 years. Not much. I'd borrowed against it over the years for emergencies, kids' needs, life's unexpected expenses. But maybe, just maybe, enough for a down payment if the stars aligned and the universe was feeling generous. Sometimes you have to bet everything on a hand you can't see. "What kind of terms are you considering?" I asked, trying to project confidence I absolutely didn't feel while my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Mr. Patterson, that was his name according to the nameplate on his desk, studied me with new interest, probably trying to reconcile my appearance with my apparent serious interest in commercial real estate. "The estate needs to settle quickly," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We're motivated to close within 30 days. Cash offers get priority, but we'll consider owner financing for qualified buyers with sufficient down payment and demonstrated ability to manage the property." Owner financing. Those were the magic words. Demonstrated ability to manage property. I'd been managing a household for 40 years. "I'd like to make an offer," I said. I cannot believe those words just came out of my mouth. He studied me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if I was having some kind of breakdown or if I actually had the resources to back up my interest. "Do you have financing pre-approved?" "No. I have $47 and a prayer. I need to make some calls," I said. "What would you need to see from a serious buyer?" "Pre-approval letter, proof of down payment funds, references and a property management plan," he said. "The asking price is $185,000. $185,000. I thanked him and walked out to my car on legs that felt like jelly, clutching his business card like it was a winning lottery ticket. $185,000. I'd never seen that much money in my life, let alone had access to it. But owner financing meant I didn't need all of it up front. I spent the rest of that day making the most important phone calls of my life, sitting in my car and using my last few minutes of cell phone service before the bill came due. First to my 401k administrator, who informed me that I had $38,000 available if I was willing to pay the early withdrawal penalties that would cost me another $8,000. $30,000. Not enough for most down payments, but maybe enough for this one. Then to mortgage brokers who hung up as soon as they heard my current address was temporary, to banks that wouldn't even let me pass the automated phone system, to anyone who would listen to a 62-year-old woman explain why she needed to buy an apartment building immediately. Most people thought I was having some kind of breakdown. But one mortgage broker, a woman named Janet whose voice sounded like she'd seen everything life could throw at someone and wasn't easily surprised, listened to my whole story. "Honey," she said when I finished, "that's either the craziest thing I've ever heard or the smartest. Let me make some calls." Janet became my guardian angel. 2 hours later, she called back with news that seemed impossible. There was a program for first-time commercial buyers that would consider owner financing with 20% down. If the property cash flowed and I could demonstrate management experience, even household management, they might approve me. Might. The most dangerous word in the English language. "Here's what you need to do," Janet said. "Get that 401k money liquidated immediately. Get bank statements showing the funds. Write up a business plan explaining how you'll manage the property. And pray harder than you've ever prayed in your life." I was already praying. The closing took place on a Tuesday morning in December, exactly 31 days after I'd first seen that estate sale advertisement in a newspaper I'd bought with my last $5. I sat in the attorney's conference room wearing the same navy dress I'd worn to the estate sale, but this time it was clean and pressed. I'd spent my last night as a homeless person in a 24-hour laundromat, using their bathroom to wash up and their Wi-Fi to review the closing documents one final time. Some life transitions happen in laundromats. When Mr. Patterson handed me the keys to Riverside Gardens, a heavy ring with 24 apartment keys, one master key and a mailbox key, my hands shook so badly I dropped them twice before I could get them safely into my purse. I'd gone from homeless to housing provider in 31 days. The first thing I did as a property owner was let myself into Unit 1A, the small manager's apartment that came with the building. It was furnished with the previous owner's belongings. A twin bed with a mattress that had seen better days, a small kitchen table scarred by years of coffee cups and paperwork, a coffee maker that looked older than Emma, and a view of the courtyard where tenants were already coming home from their Tuesday jobs, completely unaware that their building had a new owner. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. I made coffee in that ancient coffee maker. It took 3 tries to figure out how much water to use, and sat at that small table looking out at my building, my responsibility, my salvation, and started laughing. Not happy laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes when life is so absurd that crying won't cover it anymore. 6 weeks ago I'd been evicted. Now I was the one who could evict people. The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. I'd bought a business I knew nothing about in an industry I'd never worked in with money I couldn't afford to lose. The previous owner, Mr. Murphy, had left behind filing cabinets full of tenant information, vendor contacts, lease agreements, and repair records that became my Bible. I read everything twice, took notes in the margins like I was studying for the most important test of my life, and called contractors to introduce myself as the new owner. Professional development at 62 feels different from professional development at 22. The tenants were curious about me at first and more than a little suspicious. They'd been dealing with an elderly male landlord who'd lived off-site and considered property management a hobby rather than a business. Suddenly they had a woman living in Unit 1A who answered her own phone and seemed to actually care about their problems. My first crisis came on day 3 when Mrs. Chin from 2B knocked on my door at 6 a.m., still in her bathrobe and clearly panicked. "Excuse me," she said, "but my toilet is overflowing and I have to be at work in an hour and I don't know what to do." I had no idea how to fix a toilet, but I grabbed the toolbox that Dave had abandoned in my garage. Apparently plumbing tools weren't worth taking to his new life, and followed her upstairs. 3 YouTube videos, 45 minutes of trial and error, and several creative curse words later, I'd fixed my first plumbing emergency. YouTube University became my graduate school. Word spread quickly through the building that their new landlord was the older woman in 1A who answered maintenance calls herself, actually showed up when she said she would, and seemed to understand that people's problems were real problems that deserved real solutions. The previous owner had apparently operated on the principle that if you ignored maintenance requests long enough, tenants would either fix things themselves or move out. Being better than terrible made me seem amazing. Within 2 weeks I'd repaired 3 leaky faucets, replaced 2 burnt-out ceiling fans, unclogged a shower drain that had been backing up for months, and convinced the city inspector that our building was actually in compliance with new safety regulations. It just hadn't been properly documented. Competence is just confidence plus experience plus determination not to fail. The real test came at the end of my first month when Marcus Williams in 2C couldn't make his rent. He was a single father with 2 kids, working construction when weather permitted, struggling with the kind of seasonal unemployment that hits working people hardest during the holidays. I knew what struggling looked like. I knew what desperation tasted like. Marcus knocked on my door on December 31st, holding an envelope and wearing shame like an ill-fitting coat that he couldn't take off. "Mrs. Collins, I don't have all of it," he said, holding out the envelope like it contained evidence of his failure. "I've got 600 but rent's 800 and my daughter needed new winter boots, and the car needed repairs to pass inspection." I was a business owner now. I had my own bills to pay, my own mortgage on this building. But I was also a grandmother who understood that sometimes children need winter boots more than landlords need rent payments exactly on time, and that cars that won't pass inspection are cars that can't get you to work. "Marcus," I said, "can you have the rest by the 15th? The relief on his face was worth more than any late fee I might have charged. And Marcus never missed another payment. In fact, he started doing small maintenance jobs around the building in exchange for rent discounts, replacing light fixtures, painting hallways, winterizing outdoor faucets, saving me hundreds in contractor fees and giving him a way to contribute even when construction work was slow. Trust is an investment that usually pays dividends. By spring, I'd settled into a routine that felt almost normal, if you could call anything about my life normal. Coffee at 5:30 a.m. while I reviewed maintenance requests and planned my day. Mornings spent dealing with vendors, city inspectors, and the endless paperwork that comes with owning rental property. Afternoons collecting rent, addressing tenant concerns, and learning new skills through necessity and YouTube tutorials. I was working harder at 63 than I'd worked at 33, and loving every exhausting minute of it. But I was also more content than I'd been in years. Every rent check that came in was proof that I could take care of myself. Every problem I solved was evidence that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. Every morning I woke up in my small apartment, knowing that nobody could evict me because I was the one who owned the building. Independence has a flavor. It tastes like coffee you bought with money you earned from work you're proud of. Emma came to visit for the first time in April, 6 months after her family had moved out of my house and left me to face eviction alone. Michelle had called to arrange it, her voice careful and slightly apologetic, like she was asking a favor from someone she wasn't sure would grant it. "She keeps asking about you," Michelle said. "She wants to see where you live now. He wants to see if Grandma survived." When Emma walked into my small apartment, her eyes went wide with curiosity and something that might have been pride. "Grandma, this place is so cool. You're like the boss of everyone here." "I'm like the boss of everyone here. Yes, I suppose I am." She spent the afternoon meeting my tenants, helping me check the mailboxes and assisting with minor maintenance tasks. Mrs. Chin gave her homemade cookies. The college students in 3B taught her a card game. Marcus let her help him plant flowers in the courtyard beds that had been empty for years. He was proud of me. For the first time in months, someone was proud of what I'd accomplished. That evening, as we sat on my small couch sharing pizza I'd ordered from my favorite place, a luxury I could finally afford again, Emma looked at me with serious 9-year-old eyes. "Grandma, are you rich now?" "Rich? What an interesting question from someone so young." "I'm not poor anymore," I told her. "And I'm never going to be poor again." That was a promise I intended to keep. As my first year as a landlord ended, I did the math. Not just the financial math, though that was better than I'd dared hope, but the personal math. The building was profitable. My tenants were happy. My skills were growing daily. I'd gone from victim to victor in less than 12 months. I'd gone from Dorothy Collins, evicted tenant, to Dorothy Collins, successful property owner. But more than that, I'd discovered something about myself that I'd forgotten during those years of slowly drowning in other people's problems. I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. I could learn new skills, solve complex problems, and build something meaningful from the ashes of what I'd lost. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're actually worth. Today, 3 years later, I own 4 buildings and manage 62 units. Riverside Gardens was so successful that I was able to buy 3 more small properties with the profits, each one teaching me something new about business, about people, about the difference between being needed and being used. I've become the landlord I always wished I'd had. And sometimes when I'm walking through my buildings, checking on repairs or collecting rent or just making sure everything is running smoothly, I think about that December morning when I sat on a cardboard box in the rain, invisible and forgotten. That woman saved me. Her desperation became my determination. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this road with me. I hope this story gave you strength, or at least the feeling that you're not alone. Comment where you're watching from and maybe subscribe. Let's build a place where voices like mine, and maybe even yours, are finally heard.